Wish I knew we'd meet again another time, another place. Can't believe it's been so many years. You better grab a chair and a couple of beers.
Hello, welcome back to TSC Talks, the podcast where we talk about tuberous sclerosis complex. My name is Jill Woodworth, and I'm your host. Today we're on episode 26. My guest happens to be a psychotherapist in the Washington, D.C. area. She's had over 26 years of therapy experience, and she also happens to be a personal friend who I met during my first days as a freshman at Wheaton College in Wheaton, Illinois. We were both runners on the cross-country team and became close friends, kind of moved in and out of different phases of our life, but reconnected recently, and I thought she'd make an excellent guest on TSC Talks as she is a special needs mom herself and has had a wealth of experience as a therapist, might be able to speak to some of the challenges, extraneous challenges we as special needs parents have with relationships, as well as managing chronic stress with our children that are affected. So hopefully it will be helpful and interesting. I love talking to her, and I hope to talk to her more, but for now, I'm going to turn it over to her. So take it away, Ginger, and thanks again.
Hey.
How the hell are you?
I was thinking, I was just going to the bathroom, I haven't talked to her in 30 years.
I know, oh my God. I'm like, Ginger, thanks for being on my podcast. I've known you for over 30 years, and we reconnected via email, and I thought maybe you could just give us some information that might be helpful to people struggling with relationships and from a therapeutic perspective, as I mentioned in the question. So we're just going to start talking, and you can tell me a little bit about yourself, give me some background, brief bio.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Jill. Thanks
You're
for having
welcome.
me. And
Thrilled.
it's fun to be a part of your project.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm a practicing psychotherapist here in Washington, D.C. So a writer. I have a book out called The Road Out. And I have 2 kids, so I stay busy between all those things. And one of my children has a history of behavioral and emotional special needs, so I consider myself a mom of that category as well.
Oh, that's good to know, because that's highly relatable to this population.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Tell me about what made you decide to be a therapist.
You know, that was the one thing in my life that I got right quick. I took a psychology class in high school on a whim, and I just loved it. I fell in love with the ideas, the concepts. I found it interesting. It just really spoke to me. And I thought, wow, I can kind of make sense of the world if I study this. Went straight to college and was a psychology major, and went straight to grad school and have been in the field all my life. So I've never looked back, never wish I did anything different. I've found my career to be incredibly rewarding. I'm very grateful to do something I love. Feel like it actually helps people. So I feel
I'm sure it does. Tell me about your current practice, what you focus on, what your general client, what kind of clients do you take, just an overview.
Yeah, so I have a private practice in downtown D.C. I don't work with kids. I have worked with adolescents, but I primarily focus on adults, and I do mostly long-term work.
Okay.
It's interesting how people usually have something they call for, and then they'll stay for mostly just kind of general emotional growth. I have 2 specialties that I've worked on as my practice has gone on through the years. One is group psychotherapy, and one is couples work. I do a lot of couples work. Okay. So I find that I enjoy those 2 modalities the most, groups and couples.
So what, as far as challenges that you've had, what has been the most challenging aspect of your counseling and therapy? If you can break it down to a few.
Yeah, I think it's trying to find work-life balance. I mean, as much as the work is rewarding, it's also exhausting. So I have to remember that and make sure that I take good vacations and get sleep and try to exercise and engage in some self-care myself because, you know, it is a very I'm the giver. I'm the listener. I'm the one that's providing the resources, emotional resources to other people. So I have to make sure on a given day that I have enough resources myself to give.
Wow. Yeah.
So that can be a challenge. I think the other thing that, particularly those of us that go into this field with somewhat of an altruistic motive, you can't save everybody, and people will only grow and do what they want to do. So there's been a lot of letting go of outcome and kind of detaching and recognizing what my limits are and that there's only so much I can do at times. And so that can be frustrating.
Yeah. Was that hard for you initially?
Yeah. In fact, it's interesting too, because now I'm at the point in my career where I have a lot of students. So I always tell them, I said, you go into this field as, good-hearted really, but what you do is you end up taking on other people's, toxicity and also saying goodbye. So you get abandoned. So it's a hard career.
Yeah.
You fall in love with people over and over and over, and you have to say goodbye. So it's an odd career that way, because it's kind of hard to explain to someone that's not really in the field, so to speak.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I don't think that you could really understand that from any perspective other than being in it doing it over and over.
Well, and also, you're only as good as you're able to emotionally invest, right? So you're not a robot in this field. You're engaged with these people. So, it takes a lot out of you.
You can't fake it.
And that's what makes it rewarding too.
Yeah. Yeah, I bet. So do you mind talking a little bit about, I had the question here, the impact of personal life on your work, kind of just as far as like challenges with your own kids, and then heading into to give on a intense level as you do. Have you found that? Assume that's been quite challenging.
Oh yeah. I mean, I've been doing this job long enough where, I've had personal crises, and, I have to remind myself, as much as I love my work, that sometimes it is work. So I have to kind of suit up and show up, and kind of put my stuff on the back burner and be there for my patient or client as much as I can be. And that's, hard to do, but also it's part of the job requirement. So whatever kind of adaptive skills one has at compartmentalizing or triaging, that's part of the job description, so to speak.
Yeah, and that kind of speaks to the role of a lot of parents in this population to a small degree, where, moving in and out of dealing with a trauma, whether it's an emotional type like behavioral trauma or more of a physical, say a seizure, and then just having to not let it pull you down into a hole and coming back and going, like you said, suiting up and showing up and getting through the day. And I think that wears a lot of people down. It wears me down. So, I don't know if you can share any tips on your process as far as compartmentalizing at that level. Just got anything to say on that?
Yeah, I can see how that would be a correlation, both physically for a parent of a child with special needs and also emotionally. If your child's in some kind of crisis, you can't afford emotionally to be in that crisis with them, so to speak, because you have to be holding them throughout the crisis, if you get what I'm saying.
Yes, I do.
And I think, I think part of it is paying attention to oneself, but right now I can't do that. So whether that's before or after, right, making sure that I get what I need.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also important for me to be able to feel like I have some resiliency in terms of I have extra, whether I'm the therapist in my particular position or I'm the parent in that position. In other words, I can share and give and hold and not be the one that's going to collapse in the process.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, to make sure that my own emotional resiliency is kept at a high level would be an important thing to do if I'm going to be able to be a parent of a child with special needs. And I think having other people to relate to, I think particularly now talking as a parent with a child with special needs, having people that also get it.
Yes.
And that you don't have to be that strong one would allow you to maintain your strength when you can't focus on yourself in that moment.
Mm-hmm. So good support system and a network of
Absolutely.
like-minded
Absolutely.
or people experiencing the same types of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah. As far as trauma, that's a broad subject, but give me a little bit of background as far as, your understanding of trauma and how that impacts, for instance, parents witnessing children in crises repeatedly, or, behaviors that are challenging. What do you have to say about that? Am I being too broad?
No, I mean, there's two, I guess I hear the question in two ways.
Okay.
One is, how does trauma impact the child, and how does trauma impact the adult?
Yeah, just give me briefly a synopsis on how that would work.
Well, I think my overview kind of comment on that would be, well, first of all, there's two types of trauma. There's like trauma with a little t, which we experience every day.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the continuum, there's kind of trauma with a capital T, right? So we're thinking about, major life.
Yeah.
Losses, accidents, events, that basically just kind of rock our world and change everything. And then everything in the middle, right? So trauma has a really kind of a broad definition. I think the biggest difference between kind of childhood trauma and a trauma that we experience as adults is adults are experiencing trauma with an intact ego. So we're already kind of a whole person experiencing trauma outside of our already developed personality.
So it's easier to put in perspective.
Exactly. Or not take so personally, or have more kind of cognitive, emotional resources to try to grieve and heal and make sense of the trauma. Whereas a child's in process of being developed. So oftentimes what happens is the child ends up kind of consuming or enveloping the trauma, and it becomes a part of their personality. It's like it becomes more kind of interwoven on a deeper kind of psychological level. And that can really, impact the child for the rest of his or her life.
What would suggestions be? A lot of parents in this community are dealing with that. Their children are experiencing trauma frequently. What would you have as far as suggestions as to help a child that's, having seizures or watching their brother or sister have seizures? I'm just using seizures as a example, but in some cases daily witnessing that sort of thing. What would you suggest to, parents that are involved with the kids as far as reassuring, trying to mitigate some of the damage and assessing also at the same time whether this child probably needs some kind of outside support as far as to process with a therapist, as well as keeping oneself kind of on the beam while they're supporting their child?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing would be to talk about it. It's really amazing how many people daily in my practice will be talking about something, and I'll say, well, did someone talk to you about that? Or did someone, was someone there to kind of support you through that? No, we never talked about it. We just moved on. We just acted like it never happened. And I think what happens is the child then begins to not trust him or herself in terms of what they see and how it feels. And they incorporate kind of avoidance and denial as a coping skill. And so the best thing we can do as parents is, when in doubt, do. In other words, you're not making the situation worse by talking about it. The kid's already thinking about it because they're witnessing, they're seeing it, they're in it, they're doing it. It's them, it's their sister, their brother, whatever, is to talk about it. Say, hey, that was really hard. Let's talk about it. What happened? How'd that feel? What do you think? What should we do? In the sense of just allowing the child to have a space to have their own reaction and to validate that is real. Would be probably the most important thing